Hi, this is the third part in a series of videos called Why Atheism is Wrong. And this morning I want to look at the argument from design. It's not a new argument. It's been around for literally from the dawn of time, because human beings from the beginning have looked at the natural world and have intuited a supernatural presence behind the natural world. For them, nature pointed to the spiritual. The material world pointed to the spiritual. Yes, they called this spiritual reality by different names and gave it different symbols, but all human beings on the face of the earth from the beginning of time would acknowledge a supernatural dimension behind reality. And for them, this supernatural dimension was so obvious and so compelling. It was more than just an idea or just an explanation of things that they could not understand. For them, it became the basis of their whole life and culture. Look, for example, at the American Indians or the Australian Aborigines and their connection to the Dreamtime. So what is the argument from design? It's basically this: that the world displays such exquisite and breathtaking beauty and wonder and magnificence, and there is such an astronomical complexity in the nature of things that it could not have happened simply by chance, by random processes and by natural selection. The beauty, wonder and complexity of the world points to a designer, a higher intelligence, a higher power. Albert Einstein said if the only thing he had as evidence was a thumb and the way it was constructed and the way it works, he said that would be enough proof for him of the existence of God. That's the argument from design. If I take my students, for example, to see the Statue of David by Michelangelo, and one of them asked me, who made it? How did I get here? And I said, well, it was the random result of raw material being brought together. It just happened by chance. Well, you know what he would say about me behind my back. He would say, Sir's been chuffing on the wacky tobacco again. Or if I'm walking along a beach and I see a love heart drawn in the sand, and that love heart says that Mary loves Joe, it'd be ridiculous for me to suggest that that was put there or that was simply the result of the friction of shells on the sand caused by the waves. If I got my mobile phone and smashed it with a sledgehammer and put all the pieces in a paper bag and shook that paper bag for 1,000 years, I'm not going to get another mobile phone. Well, I could, but the chances are just so ridiculously, it's just not going to happen. Take evolution, for example. I believe in the general theory of the Big Bang and evolution. I accept that, but I do not accept that it just happened without some sort of guiding power behind it, some sort of guiding intelligence. Evolution tells us that the gills of fish were transformed into the lungs of an animal that could breathe on land. I mean, how many mutations would it take for those gills to change into lungs? We're not talking about minor changes here. We're talking about major transformations. For example, it's like the difference between a paper aeroplane and a jet fighter. How many mutations would it take, or did it take, for a dinosaur to develop wings that could fly? And then that bird had to find a mate through which it could, have children. It's just not going to happen. So Frederick Hoyle, who was a mathematician and an evolutionist, calculated, or tried to calculate anyway, the chances of living material coming from non-living material, and he calculated it as the chances of throwing double sixes on dice 50,000 times in a row, and then it had to happen again so that they could mate. He also said the chances of evolution happening simply through time and random processes was like a tornado going through a junkyard and making a Boeing 747. It's just not going to happen. Albert Einstein, who believed in God, he was a deist, he believed in a higher power. He said that studying the universe, looking at the physical universe, was like a child going into a library and seeing books stacked up to the ceiling. Obviously that child is going to wonder who wrote those books and who placed them in such order. Francis Collins, he is a more recent scientist. He was the leader of the Human Genome Project. They uncovered the DNA code, which was made up of something like 3 billion letters. He said that he was privileged to have discovered the language in which God created life. And he said that for him, studying DNA was an act of worship. And I think in a lot of ways, this is the worship of the future. And it buries the fallacy often promoted by many of the new atheists that science has buried religion. Science has got rid of the need for God, that science and faith are incompatible. This is just simply not true. Many people are led to belief in God because science is opening up to them the wonder and the immensity and the complexity of the universe. So it's simply just not right to say that science destroys belief in God. Einstein said that he just wanted to know the thoughts of God. Everything else for him was detail. So Lord Kelvin also, he was one of the people who put forth the second law of thermodynamics. He said that the evidence for intelligence and design were everywhere, and that the atheistic idea of evolution was so nonsensical that he could not put it into words. Let me just finish with the story of Professor Andrew Flew. Professor Andrew Flew was the pin-up boy for atheists before Hitchens and Dawkins and Harris and so on and so forth. He was the number one world famous academic atheist. He wrote many books and articles on atheism. You can actually go to YouTube and see him in a debate with William Lane Craig, I think it was in 1998, on whether there is a God, and he argues against the existence of God. Well, towards the end of his life, he changed his mind. He became a deist. He became a believer in a higher power. And he wrote a book, There Is a God, Why the World's Most Notorious Atheist Changed His Mind. Something like that. Now, what made this so disturbing for many atheists was that this guy was their leader. This guy was their spokesperson. He was, an academic professor, very intelligent. He was the Hitchens of his day, and he was prepared to admit that he was wrong. Now, what changed his mind? Well, he didn't have a vision of Jesus, or it wasn't from reading the Bible. It was from the scientific evidence. He said he just followed the evidence. And what was that evidence? The complexity of DNA. He said that it just led him to believe in a higher intelligence. Let me just read a quote from his book. What I think the DNA material has done is that it has shown by the almost unbelievable complexity of the arrangements which are needed to produce life, that intelligence must have been involved in getting these extraordinarily diverse elements to work together. It's the enormous complexity of the number of elements and the enormous subtlety of the ways they work together. So those two things. The meeting of these two parts at the right time by chance is simply minute. It is all a matter of the enormous complexity by which the results were achieved, which look to me like the work of intelligence. Thank you for listening.